hands. Everyone wants to stand, I roll in my jack. Fast like the wind, everybody's on the board. Roll to the streets, I'm the man with the plan. Got the world in my hands, every woman wants to stand. I roll in my jack, fast like the wind. Every mission I take, you know I'm gonna win. Ladies on my left, danger on the right, but it's love and respect that I'm bringing to the fight.
Welcome to the adventures of J Cat, where thrills meet tenderness in a captivating blend of sexy, excitement and romance. Hosted by the adventurous Jay Bahari, this hip podcast invites listeners to embark on exhilarating journeys filled with captivating stories and heartfelt moments. Each episode explores the intriguing intersections of adventure and love, transporting you to breathtaking romance and inspiring tales that will leave you yearning for your own escapades. Whether you're a seasoned traveler, a hopeless romantic, or simply someone who appreciates a great story, J Cat Adventures promises a delightful escape into the extraordinary, sparking your imagination and igniting your wanderlust. Tune in and let the adventures begin.
Hi, I am your host Jay Bahari. Let's go! J Cat followed the trail, determined to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The location led him to a secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city, a place where the wealthy and powerful went to indulge their darkest desires. It was the kind of place where secrets were bought and sold, where lives were destroyed for sport. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low murmur of voices. J Cat moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who belonged, even though he knew he didn't. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to leave this place and never look back, but he couldn't. Not when he was so close to the truth. And then he saw her. She was standing at the far end of the room, draped in a dress that shimmered like liquid silver. Her hair was pulled back, exposing the delicate curve of her neck, and her eyes, those eyes that had haunted him for weeks, were fixed on him. There was no doubt now. It was Camille. Or at least, someone who looked exactly like her. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The room seemed to fall away, the voices fading into a distant hum as he came face to face with the woman who had occupied his thoughts for so long. "Camille?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. She smiled, a slow, almost sad smile, and reached out to touch his face. "You always were so clever, J Cat. But you never saw this coming, did you?" His blood ran cold. There was something in her voice, something that sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't the Camille he had loved. This was someone else, someone who had taken her place. Before he could react, she moved, faster than he could have anticipated. The knife flashed in her hand, aimed directly at his heart. But J Cat was faster. He twisted out of the way, grabbing her wrist and forcing the weapon from her hand. She laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "You can't kill me, J Cat. Not really. I'll always be a part of you." He felt the darkness rise within him, the anger, the pain, the grief that had been festering for so long. This woman, whoever she was, had toyed with him, had used Camille's memory to manipulate him, to draw him into this twisted game. And now, it was time to end it. With a single, swift motion, he twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to her knees. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. She didn't answer, only laughed again, that same cold, empty laugh that made his skin crawl. "You already know," she whispered, her voice full of dark amusement. "You've always known." He stared down at her, his mind racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. And then, it hit him. The realization was like a punch to the gut, leaving him breathless and reeling. This wasn't Camille. It never had been. The woman before him was nothing more than a pawn, a tool used by the real enemy to break him, to destroy him from the inside out. But he wouldn't let them win. He wouldn't let them take anything else from him. With a final, decisive twist, he ended her life, the darkness within him consuming the last vestiges of light. The woman crumpled to the floor, her laughter silenced forever. As J Cat stood over her lifeless body, the reality of what he had done washed over him. He had destroyed the image of Camille, the last connection he had to the woman he loved. But he knew, deep down, that it had been necessary. The real Camille was gone, and he would never allow anyone to use her memory against him again. The game was over, but the hunt was far from finished. J Cat knew that this was only the beginning, that the true mastermind behind Camille's death was still out there, watching, waiting. And he would stop at nothing to find them, to make them pay for everything they had taken from him. As he left the mansion, the darkness inside him grew stronger, more consuming. The man he had once been was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. Camille's death had set him on this path, and now, there was no turning back. The hunt would continue, and J-Cat would not rest until he had his revenge. The city lights blurred into streaks of color as J-Cat sped down the highway in his Jaguar XJ220, the engine roaring like a wild beast unleashed. The darkness outside mirrored the darkness within him, a relentless, consuming force that had only grown since that night at the mansion. The woman who had impersonated Camille was dead, but the real enemy was still out there, pulling the strings from the shadows. J-Cat's mind raced as he pieced together the fragments of the puzzle, trying to discern the true identity of the mastermind behind Camille's death. Every lead he followed only seemed to lead to more questions, more dead ends. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. He had promised himself that he would make them pay, and he intended to keep that promise, no matter the cost. He was no longer the man he once was. The charming, confident international agent who could sweet-talk his way out of any situation was gone, replaced by something darker, more ruthless. The world had taken everything from him, and now, it would have to pay the price. He had nothing left to lose. The phone in his pocket buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, but he had a feeling he knew who it was. He answered without hesitation. J-Cat, a voice said on the other end, cold and calculating. "I'm surprised you made it this far." J-Cat's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Who is this?" "You know who I am," the voice replied, a hint of amusement in its tone. "I'm the one who's been watching you, guiding you. The one who took Camille from you." The rage that had been simmering inside J-Cat exploded into a white-hot fury. "Where are you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm going to end this. I'm going to end you." The voice chuckled softly. "You're welcome to try, but you should know, I'm not alone. There are others, J-Cat. Others who have a vested interest in seeing you fail. You're up against something much bigger than you realize." J-Cat's mind raced. He had suspected for some time that Camille's death was part of something larger, but hearing it confirmed only fueled his determination. "I don't care how many of you there are," he growled. "I'm coming for you, and I won't stop until every last one of you is dead." The line went dead, and J-Cat slammed the phone down in frustration. He had been so close, but once again, the real enemy had slipped through his fingers. But it didn't matter. He had a name now, a target. And he wouldn't stop until he had his revenge. He drove through the night, the city falling away behind him as he made his way to the safe house where he knew he could regroup and plan his next move. The world outside was quiet, peaceful, but inside, J-Cat's mind was a storm of rage and grief. Camille's face flashed before his eyes, her smile, her laughter, the way she had made him feel alive in a way no one else ever had. And then, the image of her lifeless body, the blood, the coldness that had seeped into his soul that day. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. The darkness within him demanded justice, demanded that the world pay for what it had done to him. He would hunt them down, one by one, until there was no one left to stand in his way. The safe house was a small, unassuming cabin nestled deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. J-Cat pulled up outside, his body humming with tension. He knew he wouldn't find peace here. Peace was something he had long since given up on, but he needed a place to think, to regroup before he made his next move. He stepped out of the car, the cool night air washing over him like a balm. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to take in the quiet, the stillness. But the darkness was never far behind, and it wasn't long before it came rushing back, filling the void that Camille had left behind. Inside the cabin, J-Cat poured himself a drink, the amber liquid burning its way down his throat. He stared into the glass, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge, of the hunt that was far from over. He knew it would consume him in the end, that the darkness would devour him whole, but he didn't care. As long as he took them all down with him, it would be worth it. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. Another unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. J-Cat, a different voice said this time, softer, almost apologetic. "We need to meet." "Who is this?" J-Cat asked, his voice flat. "Someone who can help you," the voice replied. "Someone who knows what you're up against." J-Cat's instincts screamed at him to be cautious, but the need for answers, for closure, overrode his caution. "Where?" The voice gave him an address, and J-Cat memorized it before hanging up. He knew it could be a trap, that he could be walking into his own death, but he didn't care. If it meant getting closer to the truth, to Camille's killer, he was willing to take that risk. He finished his drink, the burn of the alcohol doing little to numb the pain inside him. The darkness had taken root, and now, it was spreading, consuming every part of him. But he welcomed it. He needed it. It was the only thing keeping him going. J-Cat stepped out into the night, the cool air brushing against his skin. The hunt was far from over, but he was ready. The darkness within him had been unleashed, and it wouldn't rest until it had consumed everything in its path. He got back into his car, the engine purring like a predator ready to strike. As he drove off into the night, the road ahead stretched out before him, a path of vengeance that he would follow to the very end. And when he finally reached that end, when the last of his enemies had fallen, only then would J-Cat allow himself to rest. But until that day came, the hunt would continue. And the darkness within him would never be satisfied. J-Cat stood in the center of the dimly lit room, his chest heaving as he stared at the lifeless body of his final adversary. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and blood, the silence of the aftermath almost deafening. His knuckles were bruised and bloody, his heart pounding in his chest, but none of it mattered. The last of his enemies had fallen. The hunt was finally over. The darkness that had consumed him for so long began to ebb away, leaving behind an emptiness that he didn't know how to fill. He had spent years chasing down the ghosts of his past, driven by a need for revenge that had taken everything from him, his peace, his joy, his humanity. But now that it was over, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. J-Cat's eyes flicked to the shattered window across the room. Beyond it, the city was quiet, the neon lights casting a faint glow against the dark sky. He had always been alone in this war, fighting his battles in the shadows, with no one to witness the toll it had taken on him. But tonight, something was different. He felt a presence, something warm and familiar, like a gentle hand on his shoulder. He closed his eyes, his breath catching in his throat as a vision began to take shape before him. It was Camille, as beautiful and radiant as the day he had lost her. Her hair flowed like silk around her shoulders, her eyes shining with the warmth and love that he had missed more than anything. She wasn't just a memory, she felt real, more real than anything he had felt in a long time. "Camille," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Is it really you?" She smiled softly, her eyes filled with a tenderness that made his heart ache. "Yes, J-Cat, it's me," she said, her voice as sweet and melodic as he remembered. "You've done it. It's over." The words washed over him, bringing with them a sense of relief that was almost overwhelming. He had been fighting for so long, carrying the weight of his grief and anger like a millstone around his neck. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe. He could feel something other than pain. "I didn't know how to stop," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought if I kept going, if I kept hunting them down, I'd find peace. But I only lost more of myself." Camille stepped closer, her hand reaching out to cup his cheek. Her touch was warm, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. "You lost yourself because you let the darkness take over," she said gently. "But it's not too late, J-Cat. You can find your way back. You can be the man I fell in love with, the man you were always meant to be." Her words pierced through the layers of anger and grief that had built up inside him, reaching a part of him that he had thought was lost forever. The man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once known how to love, how to care, how to live, was still there, buried beneath the wreckage of his life. But he was still there. J-Cat swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "How?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "How do I go back to being that man?" Camille's smile was soft and reassuring, her eyes filled with an understanding that made his heart ache. "It won't be easy," she said. "But you start by letting go of the past. You've avenged me, J-Cat. You've done everything you could. Now, it's time to let go of the pain, the anger. It's time to live again." The words hit him like a wave, crashing over him with the force of 1,000 emotions he had kept buried for so long. He had avenged her, but in doing so, he had lost himself. Now, she was asking him to do the one thing he had forgotten how to do, to live. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to be that man anymore." Camille's hand slipped from his cheek to his chest, resting over his heart. "He's still in there," she said softly. "You just have to find him. And I'll be with you every step of the way." Tears welled up in J-Cat's eyes, the emotions he had held back for so long finally breaking free. He had spent years chasing after revenge, but now, standing here with Camille's vision before him, he realized that what he truly wanted wasn't vengeance, it was peace. It was love. It was a chance to be whole again. "Will you stay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you stay with me?" Camille's smile was bittersweet, her eyes filled with a sadness that broke his heart. "I can't stay, J-Cat," she said gently. "But I'll always be with you. In here." She pressed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of her touch seep into his soul. He could feel her there, a presence that would never truly leave him. It wasn't the same as having her by his side, but it was enough. It had to be enough. When he opened his eyes again, Camille was gone. The room was silent, the city beyond the window as quiet as before. But something had changed. The darkness that had consumed him for so long had begun to lift, replaced by a flicker of hope, a spark of light that he hadn't felt in years. J-Cat took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with a sense of calm he hadn't known in what felt like a lifetime. Camille was right. He had avenged her. The hunt was over. Now, it was time to find his way back to the man he had once been, the man she had loved. He looked around the room, the memories of the battle that had taken place here still fresh in his mind. But instead of the anger and grief that had driven him for so long, he felt something different. He felt peace. It was a new sensation, one he wasn't entirely sure how to handle, but it was a start. J-Cat took one last look at the lifeless body on the floor before turning away. He didn't need to look back. The past was behind him now, and for the first time in years, he was ready to leave it there. As he stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling in the distance, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The hunt was over. Camille's killers were gone. And now, it was time to live again. With one last glance at the night sky, J-Cat got into his car, the engine purring to life beneath him. He didn't know where the road would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to find out. As he drove off into the night, the darkness that had once consumed him began to fade, replaced by the promise of a new beginning. And though Camille was gone, her presence remained with him, a guiding light that would lead him back to the man he was always meant to be. The hunt was over. The darkness had been vanquished. And J-Cat, the man who had once been lost in a sea of revenge and grief, was finally ready to live again. In a short period of time, J-Cat found himself transforming back into the man everyone once loved and respected. The sharp edges of his pain began to soften, not disappearing but becoming something more manageable, more human. The loss of Camille still lingered in his heart, a wound that would never fully heal, but he was learning to live with it in a different way. Instead of letting the darkness consume him, he began to fill the void with memories of their love, moments of laughter, shared dreams, and the quiet, tender times that had once brought him so much joy. Those memories, once sources of unbearable grief, now became his anchor, grounding him in a way that rage and vengeance never could. J-Cat's friends and allies noticed the change in him. The cold, distant demeanor that had defined him during his quest for revenge started to melt away, revealing the man who had always been there, buried beneath layers of pain and anger. His powerful words carried warmth again, and his fashion sense, always impeccable, now reflected the confidence and charisma that had made him a legend. He was still the no-nonsense J-Cat who commanded respect, but now there was something more, an understanding of life's fragility, a deeper appreciation for love, and a renewed sense of purpose. He had survived the darkness, and though the pain of losing Camille would never fully fade, he had found a way to honor her memory by choosing to live, to love, and to be the man she had always believed in. In the end, J-Cat realized that replacing hate with thoughts of love was the greatest tribute he could offer Camille. It was a way to keep her alive in his heart, to ensure that her light would never be extinguished, even in the face of the darkest shadows. And so, with each passing day, J-Cat continued to rise above the pain, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live a life worthy of the love they had shared. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden hue across the tranquil waters of the Pacific Ocean. For J-Cat, the dawn symbolized a new beginning, a chance to rebuild the pieces of his life that had been shattered by Camille's death. He had spent the past few months retreating to a small coastal town, away from the chaos and danger that once defined his existence. The ocean had always brought him peace, and now, more than ever, he needed its calming influence. As he stood on the deck of his secluded beach house, J-Cat breathed in the salty air, feeling the cool breeze wash over him. The nightmares that had plagued him for so long were slowly fading, replaced by memories of Camille that no longer brought pain, but a bittersweet solace. He had come to accept that she was gone, yet her presence was still deeply woven into the fabric of his soul. It was this love, this connection, that had saved him from the abyss of hate that had once consumed him. But J-Cat knew that peace was a fragile thing. The world he had left behind was still out there, waiting, and sooner or later, it would come calling. He had made enemies during his quest for vengeance, and while many had fallen, there were those who had escaped his wrath. They were out there, lurking in the shadows, and J-Cat knew it was only a matter of time before they resurfaced. But this time, he was ready to protect the life he had rebuilt and the love that continued to guide him. The unexpected visitor. The knock on the door was sharp, startling J-Cat from his thoughts. He wasn't expecting anyone, and few knew of his location. His hand instinctively reached for the gun he kept hidden in a drawer by the door. He opened it slowly, ready for whatever might be waiting on the other side. A woman stood there, drenched from the rain that had started falling. She was beautiful, with long dark hair that clung to her face and a look of desperation in her eyes. J-Cat immediately sensed she wasn't a threat, but he didn't lower his guard. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I need your help." J-Cat hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let her in. She entered the house, shivering from the cold, and J-Cat handed her a towel. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone as no-nonsense as ever. "My name is Adelaide," she replied, wrapping the towel around herself. "I know who you are, J-Cat. I've been looking for you." J-Cat's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because I have nowhere else to go," Adelaide said, her voice breaking. "They're after me. The same people who were after you." J-Cat's mind raced. He had left that life behind, but it seemed it had found him once again. "Who are they?" he demanded. "The ones you didn't get," she said, her eyes pleading. "The ones who killed Camille." J-Cat's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Camille. The darkness he had fought so hard to keep at bay began to stir within him. "Why are they after you?" "Because I know too much," Adelaide said. "And because I'm Camille's sister." The revelation hit J-Cat like a punch to the gut. Camille had never mentioned a sister, and now here she was, standing in his home, bringing with her the echoes of a past he had tried to leave behind. But this wasn't something he could ignore. If there were still enemies out there connected to Camille's death, he couldn't turn his back on Adelaide or on the chance to finally put an end to the darkness that had haunted him. "You're telling me Camille never mentioned you?" J-Cat asked, skepticism lacing his voice. "We were estranged," Adelaide admitted. "It's a long story, but I loved her, J-Cat. I didn't know what had happened to her until it was too late. When I found out, I had to find you." J-Cat studied her, searching for any sign of deceit. But all he saw was pain and fear, emotions he knew all too well. "And now they're after you," he said. Adelaide nodded. "I managed to escape, but they won't stop. They think I know something. Something important." "What do you know?" Adelaide hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "Camille kept this hidden. I found it after she died. It's full of names, dates, places. I think it's what got her killed." J-Cat took the notebook, flipping through its pages. It was filled with cryptic notes, but one name stood out to him, Alexander Kane, a man J-Cat had thought he'd dealt with long ago. The sight of that name sent a surge of anger through him. "Kane," J-Cat muttered, the darkness within him roaring back to life. "I should have known he wasn't done." "Who was he?" Adelaide asked. "The man behind it all," J-Cat said, his voice cold. "The one who pulled the strings. If he's still out there, then this isn't over. Not by a long shot." J-Cat's eyes met Adelaide's, and he saw the fear there, but also a glimmer of hope. She had come to him for protection, and now, she was about to be drawn into a world she couldn't fully understand. But J-Cat knew he couldn't do this alone. Camille's death had set him on a path of destruction, but perhaps, with Adelaide by his side, he could finally find redemption. "The hunt begins again," J-Cat said, his voice filled with determination. "But this time, we finish it." The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and planning. J-Cat's beach house, once a sanctuary of peace, became a war room. Maps and documents covered the walls as J-Cat and Adelaide pieced together the connections between the names in Camille's notebook. Each name led them closer to Kane, and with every revelation, the stakes grew higher. But amidst the chaos, a bond began to form between J-Cat and Adelaide. They were connected by their love for Camille, but it was more than that. Adelaise's strength and resilience reminded J-Cat of Camille, but she was also her own person, fierce, determined, and unafraid to stand up to J-Cat's no-nonsense attitude. As they worked together, the lines between professional and personal began to blur. J-Cat found himself drawn to Adelaide in a way he hadn't felt since Camille. It was unexpected, and at times, unwelcome, but he couldn't deny the chemistry between them. It was as if fate had brought them together, not just to avenge Camille, but to find something more, a chance at healing, at love, at a future beyond the shadows. One night, after hours of planning, they found themselves sitting on the deck, the ocean's waves crashing softly in the background. The tension of the day had given way to a quiet intimacy as they shared stories of Camille, of their lives before everything had gone wrong. "Do you think we'll ever be free of this?" Adelaide asked, her voice soft, almost wistful. J-Cat looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes. He wanted to promise her that they would, that the darkness would finally end, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I do know that as long as Kane is out there, we can't stop. We have to finish this." Adelaide nodded, but her eyes held a sadness that tugged at J-Cat's heart. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice more confident. "Together." Adelaide looked up at him, her eyes searching his. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them, connected by something deeper than just a shared mission. "Together," she whispered, leaning in closer. J-Cat felt his heart race as their lips met, a kiss that was both tender and passionate, filled with all the emotions they had kept buried for so long. It was a kiss that spoke of healing, of hope, and of a future that, for the first time in a long time, didn't seem so impossible. The hunt for Kane took them across the country, from city streets to remote hideouts, each lead bringing them closer to their target. But Kane was always one step ahead, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. The tension between J-Cat and Adelaide grew, not from the pressure of the mission, but from the unspoken emotions that simmered just beneath the surface. They had become partners in every sense of the word, relying on each other in ways that went beyond the professional. But with every close call, J-Cat's fears for Adelaide's safety grew. He had lost Camille to this darkness, and the thought of losing Adelaide too was unbearable. The final confrontation came on a stormy night in an abandoned warehouse, a cliché, J-Cat thought, but it was where Kane had chosen to make his last stand. The rain pounded against the roof as J-Cat and Adelaide moved silently through the shadows, their senses on high alert. Kane was waiting for them, a smug smile on his face as he stood surrounded by armed men. "So predictable, J-Cat," he sneered. "You've always been too emotional. That's why you've never been able to truly beat me." J-Cat's eyes narrowed, his hand steady on his gun. "This ends tonight, Kane. No more games." "Games?" Kane laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "This has never been a game, J-Cat. This is survival. You should have stayed dead, but now, well, you'll get your wish." The fight was brutal, each side giving no quarter. But J-Cat and Adelaide fought with a determination born of love and loss, of the need to finally close the chapter on this nightmare. In the end, it was Adelaide who delivered the final blow, a bullet to Kane's heart that ended his reign of terror once and for all. As Kane fell, a look of disbelief on his face, J-Cat rushed to Adelaide's side, pulling her into his arms. The warehouse was silent except for the sound of their breathing, and for the first time in a long time, J-Cat felt a sense of peace wash over him. "It's over," Adelaide whispered, her voice filled with relief. J-Cat nodded, holding her close. "It's over." But as they stood there, surrounded by the remnants of their battle, J-Cat knew that while this chapter had ended, their story was just beginning. The days that followed were filled with a sense of calm that J-Cat hadn't known in years. Kane was gone, and with him, the last of the darkness that had haunted J-Cat. The world seemed brighter, the future more promising. J-Cat and Adelaide returned to the beach house, where they spent their days enjoying the simple pleasures of life, walks on the beach, quiet dinners, and long conversations under the stars. The bond between them had grown stronger, not just because of what they had been through, but because of the love that had blossomed between them. One evening, as they sat on the deck watching the sunset, Adelaide turned to J-Cat, her eyes filled with emotion. "What now?" she asked, her voice soft. J-Cat looked out at the horizon, the orange and pink hues reflecting the peace he felt inside. "Now, we live," he said simply. We live, and we love, and we remember that even in the darkest times, there's always a light to guide us. Adelaide smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. I'm glad that light led me to you. J-Cat kissed the top of her head, feeling a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. So am I. As the sun dipped below the horizon, J-Cat knew that while the past would always be a part of him, it no longer defined him. He had found something greater than revenge, greater than hate. He had found love, and with it, the promise of a future that was finally, truly his own. To be continued. And that's a wrap on this episode of J-Cat Adventures. I hope you've enjoyed the journey and the excitement. Don't forget to subscribe or simply get in touch with me by audio call or audio text chat. Let me know what you would like to see added, and if you enjoyed the podcast. I would love to know what you think about J-Cat Adventures. Until next time, keep your spirit of adventure alive, and remember, the world is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. This is Jay Bahari, signing off. Stay curious, stay bold, and keep exploring. Also, you can find J-Cat products at www.jcatadventures.com and at Amazon.
Every mission I take, you know I'm gonna win. Ladies on my left, danger on the right, but it's love and respect that I'm bringing to the fight. I'm the cat with the 9 lives playing the game. A heart full of fight, can't be tamed. In the shadows I roam, but I shine so bright. With every step I take, I'm doing it right. Doing it right. Got my eyes on the prize, but my heart's in the beat. J-Cat's on the mic, bringing heat to the street. When it comes to the ladies, I'm smooth like silk, but don't get it twisted, I'm the man with the milk. For every tear that falls, I'm the hand to hold. In this world of chaos, I'm the story untold. With every breath I take, every move I make, I'm writing my name in the history is fate. I'm the cat with the 9 lives playing the game. A heart full of fight, can't be tamed. In the shadows I roam, but I shine so bright. With every step I take, I'm doing it right. Doing it right.